Okay, good afternoon. We welcome you all to this webinar on the role of HR in organization development and strategic change management during uncertain times. This webinar is an initiative of ASM Executive Education Center, which provides blended executive education programs for working professionals, and the Pune chapter of National HRD Network. ISO DC and Lee Transformations are the webinar partners. My name is Jitendra Sharma, and I will be moderating today's session. Just wanted to let you all know that this session is being recorded. So without taking too much of your time, I would like to jump into it straight away and start with briefly introducing our esteemed speakers for today. We have with us Dr. Roland Livingston. He's an organization development consultant and educator. Dr. Livingston has more than 25 years of experience as a business and human resource executive and as an educational leader. He received his doctoral degree in organization change from Pepperdine University. He is currently an adjunct associate professor at the American University and at Colorado Technical University, where he teaches in master's and doctoral programs. He is also an on-call faculty member at the Center for Creative Leadership. Dr. Livingston is an active member of several professional societies, including the International Society for Organizational Development and Change, where he is immediate past president, the International Leadership Association, and the Academy of Management. Dr. Roland Livingston has provided training and organization development consultation in the United States, Europe, Asia, and the Caribbean. He has provided coaching for key leaders in for-profit and not-for-profit environments and has directed the human resources and labor relations activities in the businesses in which he has worked. Dr. Livingston teaches courses in organizational development, the fundamentals of management, leadership, and strategy. His experience focuses primarily in the areas of leadership, team effectiveness, executive coaching, culture, and management development processes and services. We welcome you, Dr. Roland, and we know it's pretty early in the morning where you are, almost 4 a.m. in the morning. So welcome.
Thank you.
We also have with us Mr. Quang Lee. Mr. Quang Lee is a change strategy consultant and an executive coach. He serves as a director of technology solutions on the board of the International Society for Organizational Development and Change, ISO DC. For 18 plus years, he has worked in information technology and management consulting industries to implement human, technical, and system processes to bring about transformative change for organizations. Specifically, Mr. Quang Lee brings his experience as a technical services and engineering practice director, change facilitator, leadership coach, management advisor, program management, and IT manager for both large and small organizations in the public and private sectors. His wide-ranging experiences have included working in and for industries and clients in government, military, engineering, universities, technology, food, clothing, retail, corporate sales, and customer services. We welcome you, Mr. Quang.
Thank you.
Okay, and before I hand it over to Mr. Quang, I just wanted to let all the participants know that the question and answer box will remain open throughout the session. So as you listen to Mr. Quang and Dr. Livingston, please put in your questions, and these questions will be taken up and our esteemed speakers will respond to them after their presentations. So without taking much more time, I hand it over to you, Mr. Quang.
Thank you, Jitendra. Thank you, ASM and NHRDN, for the opportunity for Dr. Roland and I to be with you all today. So since that was an extensive introduction, I'm going to go ahead and go right into the webinar today. Both Dr. Livingston and I are delighted to be here with you all. Our goal today is to share some insights into how HR can be a strategic change partner during disruptive and uncertain times. While this is a webinar, we hope that we bring forth ideas and concepts that you can take back with you to your organization. To gain a deeper working knowledge and practical skills, we encourage you to join our workshop on October 13th through the 17th in October. With that said, I would like to turn things over to Dr. Livingston.
Good morning to you all. Delighted to be with you. We're going to be talking about disruptive change as we go through our time together this morning. So let's make sure we're working from the same definition for disruptive change so that we're on the same page. Our definition of disruptive change for this webinar and for the workshop that we will be doing in October is any type of change that is unexpected, complex, that has caused significant impacts on the continuity of operations and where the outcome is uncertain. It's important to note that while disruptive change is often associated with technological and scientific and engineering advances, disruptive change can actually come in any shape or form. And all of us have experienced that and witnessed it currently during the coronavirus pandemic. So keep in mind today as we go through the webinar, and if you join us for the workshop in October, that we will be sharing information that will help you to deal more effectively with disruptive change. Quang?
So as organizations grapple with disruptive change, it is important to note that one of the best skills as professionals, regardless of our roles or our titles, is to understand, one, how to recognize disruptive change while it's happening, and two, how to assess our own organization's capability to respond to change. This helps us as organizational leaders create effective change strategies for the teams that we lead and for the organizations that we run. Our focus here in this webinar is to help leaders work with disruptive change, work with disruptive change in ways that allow them to acknowledge the change, work with the change, in order to create effective and resilient organizations. Before we begin the rest of the webinar, what Dr. Roland, Livingston, and I would like to understand from the audience, and we're going to ask our moderators to support us with this today, is we'd like to learn from the audience what you all hope to learn in today's webinar. So please use the chat room and enter some of the learning objectives that you're hoping to take away from today's webinar. Jitendra or Marshall, can you see if there are any chats going on for this? If not, we'll move on, but I want to make sure that we read out loud some of the chats, the learning objectives that the attendees are sharing.
So Mr. Quang, some of them are just coming in. So one says, how to ensure top management commitment. Shweta Pathak says, know more about implementing OD in current scenarios through smaller process improvements. Avesh says, tips and techniques for changing management starting from the top. Rajesh says, role of MD, CEO, COO in change process. Jay Kumar says, how do HR be a role model for change management? And we have again Rajesh saying, okay, that we've got. Pawan says, looking forward for the ways to manage workforce by keeping them engaged and motivated towards work, and how to encourage participation. We also have Joe Marsh saying, how can a business leader or a HR professional face these challenging situations, and how do we overcome them? We also have Emmanuel saying, what are the various OD tools for OD and CM? Deepesh asks how it will help in managing the present COVID situations with respect to management. So I hope you got a lot of thoughts on that, Mr. Quang?
Yeah, I heard some great learning objectives today, and Dr. Roland and I we will try to touch upon many of those. In particular, one that I heard that we're going to actually touch upon is a tool. So in this webinar, we're going to actually be sharing with you a model for change that will help you contextualize change as you're dealing with this disruptive change in your organizations today. Roland, did you have anything else you would like to share?
I just think that a number of the items that were mentioned in the chat, we will certainly touch upon as we go throughout the webinar today. So stand by.
Yeah, those are great learning objectives. So today, much of the disruptive change is a result of globalization. So this is not anything new that we all are experiencing. We just wanted to highlight ways to contextualize disruptive change. It can come in many different forms, from technology and competition are two very common disruptive change that most organizations and leaders face. For example, I can share with you, Uber is both a direct competitor to the taxi industry here in the United States, as well as in India. That's an example of a competitive disruptive change. What makes Uber a little bit more distinctive is the fact that they aren't just a taxi competitor, they're also a technological disruptor to change, because they use technology in a new way to service clients and to provide a service to clients that hasn't really been done before. And also, we can't ignore the fact that the world recently has experienced the strain of COVID across business sectors and industries as a result of COVID shutting down much of the supply chain in the world. These are just a few examples of external disruptive change scenarios. I want to, it's easy to think that, and so right now, as a result of COVID, many country leaders have advocated for less globalization. And the reality is this is not really correct thinking, because globalization is here to stay. Here's why. Simply because businesses will always seek out the best sources in the global supply chain to meet their production needs. And they will seek out these sources at the lowest possible cost. So while COVID may cause some changes where goods are sourced, in the months to come and in the year to come, it won't eliminate globalization. I share this fact because it's important to understand that globalization and disruptive change is really here to stay. And in order to continue to be able to respond to disruptive change, we need ways to deal with change as opposed to avoiding it. Some internal, while we talked about I shared some external drivers of disruptive change. At the same time, disruptive change can also come from internal sources. As businesses and organizations retool or revamp themselves or revise their internal strategy and mission to meet production or service demands, all of these actions can actually create internal disruptive change as well. So this is the part where we'd like to conduct a poll of the audience to see what kind, whether you're experiencing external or internal disruptive change in your organization right now. So Marshall, if you could run a poll for us. Yeah, so the first question in this poll is, please select either external or internal, and we're gonna all get to see the results here. Wow, those numbers look very interesting. So there are about 76 attendees And the numbers are coming in, and it looks like a predominantly, roughly 80% right now, most of you are experiencing external disruptive change. And notice here that at the same time, about 20% of you are also experiencing internal disruptive change, right? So this speaks to the fact that disruptive change can be both external and internal. I'm going to take a quick screenshot of this. Okay, great. Okay, so now that you've answered this, and it looks like it's settled here upon it's an 80-20 split, 80 external and 20 internal. I'd like Marshall to execute the second poll question. This is where you as the audience get to categorize with a little bit more specificity around the type of internal or external disruptive change that you're experiencing. So here's how we're going to answer this poll. If you look at this poll, there are two questions. Question one is for those of you who selected, the 20% of you who selected internal change, disruptive change. So please pick one of these. And for those of you who selected external change, please look to question number 2 and pick one of these 4. So we've listed here a few types of disruptive change, both external and internal. This isn't a comprehensive list, but we wanted to just do a wide collection of the types here so we can see as an audience the types of and the categories of disruptive change, both external and internal. So I'm looking at internal disruptive change. This is very interesting. Internal disruptive change right now, the majority, it's kind of evenly split between strategic, people, and performance, which is not surprising given what is happening in the world today. And I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to look at some external change factors. Not surprised that about 50% of those respondents who selected external change that it's really market forces, supply, they're really economic issues. So we're going to give you a few more minutes to vote on this. I'm going to turn to my colleague, Dr. Livingston. Do you have anything you'd like to share with this so far? Roland?
As I look at the results of the poll, I'm mindful of the fact that what may start as an external disruptive change sometimes will, always will have an impact internally, so that there may be disruptive change that is certainly felt inside the organization. It may start from the outside.
Yep.
And I'm noticing a large number of internal factors related to strategy and people.
Yeah. That's great. Okay. So I just noted that this is very interesting. So if you want to take a screenshot of the poll, just so you can have it for future, for later reference, that's great. I took a screenshot and I'm going to turn it over to Roland at this point to continue.
Okay, good. So we can stop sharing the poll results at this point. I just started by saying that internal and external disruptive change sometimes morphs and they come together. I'm still seeing the poll on my screen. Can we take the poll down now? Let me see, do I have to, I have to do it on my own screen. Okay, very good. So from my perspective, I want to talk about human resources and the role that HR has in managing change. Sometimes human resources has to implement a change because it's required by law. That's to say, it may be something from outside of the organization that forces a change in the laws or some safety requirements that are laid on an organization. Sometimes HR has to facilitate change because it's requested by other internal stakeholders. For example, a change in IT operations due to efficiency or effectiveness needs. And HR helps to enable that change because it's simply the right thing to do to give current and future organization conditions. Regardless of whether change is required, whether it's requested, whether it's simply the right thing to do, or all three, a key ingredient in working with the business leaders in the organizations is to strategically partner with them. HR also has a major role in ensuring that changes that are identified are carried out throughout the organization and that they're carried out in a respectful way. The behavioral competencies that most HR professionals embody allows them to use their knowledge of relationship management and their consultation skills to engage business leaders and organization employees in the kind of change that is needed. And a key role that the human resource professional plays is to help business leaders understand and facilitate change in a respectful way. Another reason why it's important for human resource professionals to learn how to engage with business leaders is human resource leaders and HR, back up, Roland. Human resources and business leaders have to engage in strategic partnership because change is going to continue. Change is going to continue in the HR profession itself. Executives in the C-suite in many organizations expect there to be a wide range of changes in the human resource profession in the next 10 years. Everything from broadening the scope of HR business partnerships to outsourcing HR tasks, particularly HR administrative tasks, to pushing out more HR responsibility to line managers. These kinds of changes require and represent a strategic decision and require HR managers and professionals to step up their game in order to operate strategically in their relationship with business leaders and line managers. At the end of the day, organizational change and changes in HR need to be successful. And in order for that to occur, HR simply needs to make the changes that will drive positive value and improve organizational effectiveness while helping to align strategy and culture. And in order to do that, it's important for human resource professionals to understand the business of the organization, not just human resource roles and competencies, but to truly understand what business the organization is in. And while the HR professional doesn't need to know how to run the business, understanding the business will help the HR professional be more effective in his or her role at working with the business leaders. And since change will be a constant, whether it's large scale or small change, human resources needs to embrace its role and be an effective and strategic facilitator of change. The better HR is at evolving its role into a strategic partner, embracing changes in the HR profession all the while, the better it will be in adapting the way it approaches change and helping its business partners adapt to change. I want to give you a metaphor that may be helpful in looking at how to form this strategic partnership. We're going to be talking about adaptive leadership as a metaphor. The single most important skill and the most undervalued capacity for exercising adaptive leadership is diagnosis. And that's because most business leaders, as well as many HR leaders, who have moved up the hierarchy into senior positions of authority are naturally socialized and trained to be good at taking action and at decisively solving problems, at making things happen. But when one is caught up in the action, it's hard to do the diagnostic work of seeing the larger patterns of the organization. So think about this. To diagnose a system or even to look at yourself while in the middle of the action requires the ability to achieve some distance from those on the ground events that are occurring. An adaptive leadership approach is to get up on the balcony above the dance floor in order to gain distance and in order to gain a perspective that one needs in order to see what's really happening. As long as you stay moving on the dance floor, all you're going to see will be the people who are dancing with you and around you, people who are swept up in the music. And it may be a really great party and you're feeling it because you're on the dance floor dancing away with all of the folks who are there. But when you get up on the balcony, you may see a very different picture. From that vantage point, you may notice that the band is playing loudly, playing so loudly that everyone's dancing on the far side of the room. And when the music changes from fast to slow or back again to fast, different groups of people decide to dance and many other people decide to hang back near the exit doors. And some people don't dance at all, no matter what the music is. So in some respects, it may not be a great party after all. And think about this. If someone asked you later to describe the dance, you would paint a very different picture of the dance if you would describe what you saw from the balcony rather than only from the dance floor. So the challenge of adaptive leadership is having the ability to move back and forth between the balcony and the dance floor, which enables the leader, enables you as an HR strategic partner to continually assess what's happening in the organization and to take corrective mid-course action. Leaders, HR professionals, and business partners who are adept at adaptive leadership find it possible to do both of these simultaneously. And that's the challenge, being able to keep one eye on the events that are happening immediately around you and the other eye on the larger patterns and dynamics that are impacted by what's going on around you. Quang?
I love that. I love that metaphor. That's a great metaphor for what I think a lot of organizations are experiencing today. So when we look to understand the process of change, so I've scanned some of the questions here, and I just wanted to let you all know, we're not answering the questions while we're doing the webinar, but we will come back to the questions that you all have posted at the end of the session during a Q&A session. And there are some really great questions out there. So we're not ignoring you. We are just wanting to move through this content to share information, and then we will do post the webinar, we will do a Q&A section. But this idea of a metaphor between the balcony and the dance floor as a leader, you aren't just listening to music, dancing, and observing others on the dance floor, but being able to take leave of what's actually happening around you, and to get onto the balcony to look down and see the mood and the energy of the place isn't important. So to support you in assessing change from an organizational perspective, this is like you in the dance floor, in the dance hall, standing on the balcony. We use a framework called the 3C framework. There are many different change frameworks. We're choosing this one because this ties in with our October change workshop, and it is a robust framework for assessing, diagnosing, and navigating change. So here are a couple of key questions as leaders that we can ask ourselves as we're navigating disruptive change. So the first question is, to what extent do we understand our organizational's capacity? So this is the entire organization's capacity to operate in the changing market, economy, and landscape today. This deals with capacity. 2, the second question is, to what extent do we as an organization understand the strengths, talents, knowledge, and skills that we can leverage within the organization? This deals with competency. And third, to what extent do we as an organization make use of our resources, people, budgets, to maximize our performance to address our goals? So a lot of leaders, when you're navigating change, or if you're an HR profession, HR leader or professional helping a leader navigate change, this 3C framework speaks the language of business: capacity, competency, and capability. So as we work with change, one thing that we will note is that there is an overlap between these 3 areas. There's a natural overlap between these 3 areas. And this helps us as we focus in and drill down to diagnose what's happening in our organization. This is where the 3 overlap areas help transform organizations when they're seeking to implement change. Roland?
It is important to keep in mind that change is a process. And in today's disruptive change world, change isn't necessarily just a one-time occurrence. It's a continuous evolution of best practices that enables you to more effectively respond to disruptive change. And as with all skills, you gain proficiency, you gain momentum, you build a tolerance for change once you can begin to master essential change skills. So in the metaphor that was used earlier of being on the dance floor and on the balcony, mental agility is needed to make adjustments to observe not only what's going on around us, but also what's happening from a broader organizational perspective. And an analogy for change as a process is like learning a new type of dance. For example, you don't train someone, and perhaps for yourself even, you didn't learn to dance by getting masterful at that the first time you tried it. Instead, you train someone else, you train yourself by getting some first steps at learning the new dance step, practicing by yourself, having them practice by themselves, maybe practice with a partner, and in time, you learn to be proficient in the dance move. So change as a process is very much the same way. If you take a look at the change process, the framework that Quang has shared with you here, capacity, competency, and capability, as you become effective in looking at what's occurring in the overlap, you are preparing yourself to help your organization be more effective in learning how to see what's going on, then how to make sense of what you see, and then in doing something to adapt to the change. So by practicing these change skills repeatedly over time, you will become more proficient at recognizing change, adapting to change, and using change strategically to be more effective. Let's give you a chance to think about this through a case study. Let's say that you are indeed the HR business partner, an internal change agent in your organization. And the scenario that you are faced with is that the IT organization in your company has hired an external change consultant to help them to assess conditions in the organization that would either support or hinder collaboration. The IT organization believes that collaboration is a key factor in them being able to align different groups within IT to support client projects across the organization. The change consultant, the external change consultant, has produced a comprehensive report along with some suggested recommendations for the IT executives to consider in order to create a more collaborative work environment within IT. Change consultant has given that information over to the IT executives, feeling that their work is done. A year has gone by, and the IT managers realize that not many of the changes are being implemented. And it recognizes that there is a need to resume the work that they started on dealing with collaboration. So now they turn to you, their HR business partner, to help them with these changes. As you think about that scenario, an external consultant came in, did an assessment, handed over some information to the IT organization. Think about the 3C framework that is on the screen. Which 3C question did the IT organization ask themselves in wanting to study collaboration? Quang, I think we want them to put something in the chat box on this. Is that correct?
Yes. So we wanted the participants. It may help you. I'm going to show the case study real quick as Dr. Livingston has shared the case study verbally. But I wanted to leave the 3C framework up for everyone to take a quick screenshot, and I'll show the case study and the questions shortly. But we want you to chat your response to the first question, which is, as Dr. Livingston stated, which 3C question did the IT organization ask themselves in wanting to study collaboration? We recognize there's going to be many different answers, so please feel free to share. In this point, this is a webinar, so it's a learning environment. And Roland, I just wanted to say that we probably should just do one case study today, given the time.
That's fine.
Okay.
So we have a couple of feedback coming in on the chat. So we have Rajesh Sarkar saying competency and capabilities. We have Sujit Nair saying capabilities. Dr. Naresh Mehta, competency of collaboration. We also have from Shobhanam, competency. Emmanuel says all the three. And we have Avesh saying capability and competency. Vikram Sathe saying competency.
Yeah.
Okay. So those are good responses. Every response is a good response. There are no wrong responses. It all depends on what you are looking at and what you're thinking about as you look at this particular scenario. Now,
And we
as the
got,
HR,
yeah, sorry to stop you there, Dr. Roland. We got one more interesting feedback. Somebody says it's Surya Pawar saying all three and communication too. Maybe the message wasn't conveyed properly to all in the organization.
well, I think that is very prescient, because we will talk about communication toward the end as well.
Okay.
So that's
Yeah,
great.
sorry, go ahead.
No problem. That's great. So here's the second question. Now you are the HR business partner. What are you going to use? How are you going to use the 3C framework? This is the second question. How are you going to use the 3C framework to help you as you consider what you should ask your IT business partner in order to understand the change that they are examining? How would you use the 3C framework in your engagement with the IT business partner?
Yeah.
You can pop those responses into the chat box as well.
Yeah.
So a question that I see there is, why do you need enhanced collaboration? What will success look like? And I would take that question, what will success look like, to mean what would success look like if indeed collaboration was occurring within IT? What is the pressing need or necessity for change? What's getting in the way? This question is really very important. Why are we unable to drive collaboration now? What's getting in the way of our ability to collaborate effectively? Is it a matter of capacity? Is it a matter of competency? Is it a matter of capability? You might also ask, what have we done thus far? These are all very good questions. And as the HR business partner, the key thing is for you as an HR business partner in working strategically with your strategic business partner in the organization is to engage in a conversation and dialogue whereby together, through your own collaboration with your business partner, together you are assessing what's going on, and together you are working to help come up with an approach that will enable the IT organization to enhance and improve its own ability to collaborate among that staff.
Yeah. I want to jump in and highlight something here. So when we share this framework, these sample questions in this webinar is just scratching the surface. And we can see from just scratching the surface, I see in the chat room a multitude of really great questions, right? And so organizing your questions into capacity, capability, or competencies help you focus and drill down deeper into these areas where there's some overlap, so that you can actually start looking at where there are either gaps or areas for improvement in order to implement the change, right? And so this is highlighted in the overlap areas. So great. We're going to go ahead and move on. We have prepared a second case study, but given the time, we're going to move on. So hopefully you'll join us for the workshop and you'll be able to dig deeper into some of this. We want to highlight some of the communication strategies that are important. So why is communication so important during change? And this is going to summarize why communication is super important. At the end of the day, change is about making an impact in the organization through the teams and people working in the organization, not the organization as an entity by itself, right? It's through the people that we're able to implement and make transformative change. To successfully achieve a particular or certain outcome, you need people to embrace the change that you're implementing or wanting to orchestrate. And so when leaders share outcomes they are trying to achieve with their employees, when leaders explain why the change is necessary and solicit the support of the teams and people to help them, the leaders, devise a change approach, then the likelihood of success is greater because it helps the employees understand their role and how they're contributing to the change initiative. This helps create action overall. This really serves as the baseline of change communications. Roland?
Yeah, as you see here on this slide, the model to the left, plan for the change, craft the change message, monitor the change in order to get employee action, moving in the direction of change. And it's important in figuring out ways to communicate to be clear and accurate with the information that you are sharing. As you think about planning for the change, what's going to be most impactful in helping people to understand the need for change and where it is that you want them to focus their efforts and their energy. Many times we tend to over communicate with a lot of words and people get confused and balled up, if you will. So it is better to use short, quick methods of communication through multiple means of communicating. And that may mean in your organization using email or using chat box, internal chat messages, but multiple methods of communicating. Depending upon the nature of the change would determine the frequency and the timeliness of the change, but most importantly, giving people information at the time that they need it that's going to enable them to be most effective in moving in the direction that you want them to go, that you want the change to go. And always along the way, check for understanding to ensure that people indeed are getting the message that you are trying to communicate to them. At the end of the day, as Quang said, change is about making an impact in the organization. And we make that impact through the teams and people whom we depend upon and with whom we engage in the organization in order to accomplish the things that the organization feels are necessary and important to sustain and maintain its competitive advantage. So as you think about communication, again, using the chat box, what practices are you using in your organization today to communicate during the disruptive change that your organization may be experiencing, whether you perceive it to be internal or external? What practices around communication are you using today to deal with disruptive change? Let's see what kind of responses we get to that.
Excellent question.
And one of the first things I see is email and virtual meetings. In fact, there's no question about the fact that we are all doing virtual meetings today.
Yeah.
Virtual conferencing.
I also see the use of WhatsApp as an official form of communication. That's definitely a short and quick type of communication.
Mm-hmm. Town hall meetings. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
I see a lot of emails. So the question I have to emails, based on the list here that we've presented, how do you check for understanding when it's just an email? So that's the next question. So if you're using email, how do you check for understanding?
I see one response that says, unfortunately, our leaders do not communicate. Sad.
This is reality. This happens, right? This is organizational life.
Yeah, yeah. There's a response to your question, Quang. Increased frequency and short and crisp emails. Yeah.
Yeah, I love this one. During group and one-on-one meetings, check for understanding, right?
Yeah.
So just because you send an email, it can't just be assumed that the email means everyone understands the same thing. So when you actually do have the webinar, or the video conference meeting, or the phone conference, or even chatting with employees in your team, that's where you can actually do the check for understanding. So here's a second question. I think this is a really productive question to ask of the audience. When you think of change communication, what has worked and what hasn't worked during this era of COVID for you in terms of communication? So that's the question. So in this era, in this period of COVID where we're all forced to work from home or telework, what has worked and what hasn't worked in terms of communication?
Arguments.
I'm seeing in-person calls and WhatsApp communications. That's really worked. Staying in touch using different media and frequently doing so.
Mm-hmm.
More webinars.
Yeah. Reach out, divide and conquer. Leaders call a set of people on an individual basis, and that way we are reaching out over a few thousands of employees each month. In other words, the leader doesn't have to do it all. You can set up a stream of communication by hitting key touch points and having them communicate. Great.
Yeah.
And what has not worked is Zoom fatigue. That is very important. That is very important to notice and to acknowledge. And that presents another challenge for HR professionals to help an organization deal with Zoom fatigue, because no doubt that is occurring.
That is occurring. I have clients who are speaking to that today, right?
Okay.
Great. So there's a wealth of chats going on right now. We're going to go ahead and move on, given the time, so we can make sure that we end on time for everyone here. So, learnings from today. Here are some of my reflections about what we've covered. So there was a request for some models or tools. And so we've actually shared, at least touched upon the 3C framework. We recognize that this was not an in-depth drill down to the entire framework, given the webinar timeframe, but we have touched upon that. We've also talked about this. The second learning was, I heard, how do we implement OD, small process change improvements? And so again, I'm going to say this idea of being a leader, regardless of what role you play inside of the organization, being able to both be on the dance floor and up in the balcony, both to experience what's happening around you and in context to other peers in your team, and then taking the adaptive leadership mindset where you're stepping up onto the balcony to observe and see what's happening. Again, there's another opportunity to use the 3C framework while you're on the dance floor with your own teams, and then while you're up on the balcony. Roland, any learnings from today that you feel like we've addressed?
I hope that we have emphasized that the changes that are occurring in HR as well, and that they are long-term structural changes that HR has to address within its own organization. And although many of the principles of human resources will remain the same, the way human resources is executed has changed and will continue to change, if for no other reason than the fact that we are working more virtually than we ever have before. Driving forces behind these changes, the changes in HR and the changes that we're seeing within our organizations that are going to make them to be effective, is what the organization needs and the leadership that is provided to help that process along. I want you to focus on what it is that you see, and then make sense of what it is that you see, that you can say, now I know what it is that I'm seeing. And then with that knowledge, that sense making, decide action that you're going to take so that you can take the steps that will enable you and your strategic business partners to make the next best adaptive move. I like to say how important it is to always do the next best thing. And the see, know, do, act approach is what will help you to be effective in doing so. Right?
Yeah. So I can't believe that we are at 1 hour exactly. It's gone by so fast for me. Roland, Dr. Roland Livingston and I would like to thank all the participants today for showing up to this webinar and being so engaged in the chat room and the polls. We hope you've enjoyed this experience. We are looking forward to seeing and working with many of you in the October workshop. We also want to thank our ASM and NHRDN partners for making this opportunity happen and for inviting us to their webinar series. And thank you, our moderators, to Marshall and Jitendra, for being excellent moderators today. Roland?
Yeah, lastly, I just want to thank you, Quang, for your insights in helping to tie the 3 C's to the balcony and the dance floor metaphor. And I want to leave folks with an understanding that disruptive change doesn't have to immobilize an organization. That indeed we can face change and be successful in dealing with it.
So while you're, before we wrap up here, I am going to text a quick survey, and I have on the screen a QR code. If you want to complete the survey via your mobile phone, please feel free to go ahead and do so. It's a very quick survey. It's literally only going to take a few seconds. This is feedback for Dr. Roland Livingston and myself about the webinar that you've experienced today. It allows us to fine-tune our webinar experience for participants, but we would love to get your feedback. So please take a moment to complete the survey. At this point, I want to turn things over to our esteemed hosts, Jitendra and Marshall.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Roland and Quang. So we did see a lot of on the chats about Zoom fatigue and screen fatigue. So we are over an hour, but I would just request the attendees to please hang on for another 10 minutes. We are going to take up some of your questions so that you get answers to whatever has been in your mind. So I'll put up the questions and then either of you can respond. And the first one actually is a common theme from a couple of questions. So there's a question from Shweta Pathak, and she says, I work as a senior L&D OD professional in a construction company where OD seems to be an alien concept to most of the senior leaders. And in spite of the top management commitment available, none seems interested. Please suggest the ways how to bring OD into the culture of the organization. A related question was from Dr. Naresh Mehta, who says how to enhance top management's commitment in change journey. So over to you for your answers.
Yeah, I think both Roland and I will have different answers or similar answer to that, but I'll take it first. I will say this, it is very challenging to get leaders to buy into the idea of OD. And here's what I mean. You need to speak their language around capacity, competency, and capabilities, because for leaders, they are specialized in the field of expertise that they bring. So coming to them to talk about OD isn't always the best approach in terms of getting them to buy into the idea of what it means to help formulate change. But when it, as in Dr. Roland Livingston's discussion about the whole dance floor and balcony idea, and then also being a strategic partner, it's stepping into the business side of your role, whether you are a senior leader, L&D, OD, HR, even if you don't carry those titles, even if you're just a manager on a team, it's about bringing the business side to the leaders so that you understand, and so that they understand the context of what it is that you're trying to do. So that's one answer. Roland?
Yeah, I would add to that by saying that it's important to know what kinds of questions to ask that leader. Think about the questions that you want to ask, and ask questions that help you to help them to know that you're there to try and help them in dealing with the challenges that they face. So ask them what keeps them up at night as it relates to the business, and as you ask those questions, take it down one more level. Why is that important? And take it down one more level. Tell me a little bit more about that. Why is that important? And ultimately, you will begin to hear from them that they're talking about some of the challenges that they're having with people in their organizations for whatever reason, not understanding what they need to understand in order to execute. But I think the most important thing, not reiterating, but emphasizing again what Quang said, is understand the business. I mentioned that in my earlier comments during the webinar, how important it is for you to understand the business that you are in. Don't get trapped into the notion that you have to tell them that OD is good for them.
Yes.
This medicine will help you. Take this OD. It's not going to work.
Right.
Not going to work. What's important to them is what you want to understand. And then you can talk about, well, here are some ways that you might consider getting at that.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks. So there is one question which actually could be a good follow-up question, which is asked by Professor Subhashish Bhattacharya. There are many organizations who do not change. If all companies are aware about the benefits of change, then why is it that most of them do not change? What to do to see such organizations get benefit of adopting change before they lose out?
Yeah, so I love this question. These are great questions. Change is hard. You know, it's like this. I'll use an analogy. It's like saying, hey, your doctor tells you you need to cut out certain things that you're eating because you have high cholesterol. But you love and enjoy those things that you eat and consume every day. So in order to change, oftentimes it feels like we have to give up something. And so this idea of change is so fundamentally difficult for us as individuals. It is even more difficult for leaders because it's the same kind of process. They are very used to, and oftentimes they have constructed their teams or their organizations or the work that they do, and it's been very successful. So as disruptive change is happening, there needs to be a way for them to experience the benefit side of the change, as opposed to the deficit side of what they're losing, right? So this idea of change is that if you can understand what the benefits are, then you're much more likely to adapt to change. Going back to the dietary high cholesterol example, if you tell me that I can eat something equally just as nice, maybe it's a different thing that I can eat as opposed to the thing that I have to give up, I may not feel that I'm losing too much in the dietary restrictions that I have to exchange in order to get a lower cholesterol number. Roland?
Yeah, and I looked at that. I hear that question, and I drew the shape of a U on my page here, and that U represents a nice, comfortable, cozy groove that I'm in. That I don't want to get out of that groove. And I think what Quang has said is important, helping that manager, business leader understand the benefits of change. And by the way, also understanding what some of the challenges are for remaining in that groove, because what's happening outside of that comfortable groove that I'm in, my competitors may be doing things that are going to be harmful to the thing that I'm protecting as I stay in that groove. So I need to make sure that I'm paying attention to what's going on, not only within my groove, but also what's going on either side of it as well. Asking the right question, finding the kinds of questions that will help that leader, help that organization decide for itself that change is going to be beneficial, is the challenge I think that we as HR professionals and OD&C professionals have in helping organizations to change.
Excellent, thank you. And I can see a number of questions which actually you've already touched during your presentation. So I think in interest of time, I'll take one last question, and the others will be made available to you. And I'm sure during the workshop, you'll be touching all those points. So the last question I'd like to share is from Syed Kalimullah. And his question is, what change can we see in technology, people, system, or processes post-pandemic? And a very relevant question in the current times.
Okay.
So I will take pieces and parts of this. So what kinds of changes can we see in technology, systems, and processes? So I'll start with processes because I talked about global disruptive change, right? And so one of the processes I think that is already beginning to happen from a global supply chain is that most industries are recognizing that the one source for their supplies or goods is not a feasible mechanism when there's a global pandemic, right? And so if you're buying all of your raw materials from one place, and that one place has now been shut down because of COVID, you're out of luck. So this is already starting leaders to think about where can they get their a multitude of different sources. So that's one external disruptive change process. When we talk about systems, I think there are different definitions of systems here, but I'm going to refer to them as mechanisms for change as opposed to technical systems. Mechanisms for change, what we're going to see and is already we're already seeing happen is this idea of working from home. Organizations who have been historically not embracing work from home ideas are now seeing the benefit of work from home. And what I mean by that is there's two sides to that system perspective. On the financial side, the need, we already know, and so I'll share some data with you. Gartner CFOs, Gartner Research, they have interviewed some of their CFOs, and what we're seeing is that already 60 to 70% of the chief financial officers in organizations are seeing the benefit of work from home. In other words, they're not having to provide physical office space. That's a direct impact to the bottom line if they're not having to sustain a physical work environment. It's much cheaper and more cost effective to have people work from home. At the same time, we're also seeing things like Zoom fatigue. And so certain leaders are recognizing that there's a lot, and this is from a systems perspective, seeing a lot of Zoom fatigue from their people. And there's this idea that just because we're working from home, there's a need to be on a Zoom call. In reality, you can probably, and we saw some of this today, address some of the communications by not having a Zoom call. You can either do it through chats, you can either do it through a teleconference. Not every call needs to be a FaceTime call. And then the third part is technology. We're already seeing some of the use of technologies in terms of implementing change. But I want to highlight some technologies that may not have been thought of before, and that is what are different mechanisms of technology that will allow people to work more effectively? Not just Zooms and phones, but you know, how do we enable people to work in a way that allows them to collaborate, right? And so not just using these telephonic communication tools, but how do we share documents? So for example, Dr. Roland Livingston and I, we work virtually. We're not in the same place, but we work virtually on everything that we do in a way that allows us to share information and collaborate in very different ways. And here's a part of technology, we work asynchronously. So because there's a different time zone for us, even in the United States, we will pass things back and forth, collaborating and commenting with each other before we actually meet. So there's a use of technology and communication in a way that is not normally traditional in that sense. Roland?
Yeah, let me just add to that. We are indeed both in the United States, but we are 3 hours apart from each other. Quang had the good fortune of being able to sit at his office at 7 a.m. and I had to sit in my office at 3 a.m. in order to be on at the same time, for example. But because of that, not because of that specific instance, but in the example that he just gave, we do collaborate asynchronously and at the same time are able to share information with each other and update documents and so forth. And some of you may be doing that yourself. So that's one thing. But I also want to comment on one of the other types of change that Jitendra mentioned was people change. And I think the people change that we have to be mindful of is the fact that the generations are changing within our organizations, and that the generations that we experience here in the US are probably similar to what you may be experiencing there in India. We have at least four generations in a workforce, in a single workforce today. And not all of those generations have the same wishes and desires for their experience in working in our organizations. So one of the things that the HR professional has to help the business leaders understand is the impact of generational change on people's desires to work for that organization and to work for the organization in particular ways. An older generation may be very comfortable using technology of the type that they grew up with. The younger generation is quick to pick up on new technology and new means and ways of doing things and want to run much more quickly toward change than perhaps folks who have been around a bit longer. So understanding the impact of generational differences in the organization is an area of change that we need to help our organizations with as well.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you for that. And in fact, a very elaborate explanation. In fact, I can think that a lot of the other questions also touch these bits, and your answers actually help them. And to the other attendees, I mean, we could not get to all the questions, but all your questions are being taken and will be shared with the speakers. And if you think that, this is the time to say bye-bye to Dr. Roland and Quang, it's not, because this is just the webinar. The actual thing is going to happen in October, where you will actually get a platform to interact with more time and more details. So I'm sure I will see all of you in that workshop, and that will be another opportunity to interact with our speakers. I now would like to invite Mr. Aman Rajbali from the NHRDN to share his concluding thoughts and the concluding remark, and then take this session to a conclusion. Mr. Aman, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jitendra. It's been overwhelming. It's been encouraging, heartening, energizing, the session that we had. Thank you so much, Dr. Roland, Quang. It's been a pleasure. We've been in conversation for quite some time, but attending this session actually as a participant, I've gained so much, and I'm sure that all the participants that we have had today, I think we were some more than 90 people who joined, and the kind of questions that people have asked, and as Jitendra mentioned, there are quite a few questions that we were unable to answer. My apologies to all the participants, but thank you. And for me, the metaphors that both of you used, the the cholesterol, the dance floor, was very interesting, made learning very smooth. Yeah. On behalf of the National HRD Network, ASM Executive Education, I would like to also mention, as mentioned earlier, that the workshop that is being organized, yeah, to start with, this is a highly subsidized course that we have come up with in terms of the fees, but in terms of content, it is very, very rich. And believe me, the speakers, you've seen the kind of quality and the background, the rich experience that they have. They are going to be the main facilitators. As HR professionals, we need to understand the change that is happening at global level. There's major disruption happening everywhere, and considering the current COVID scenario, business is changing drastically. As HR professional, what is it that we do? How can we skill ourselves? How can we develop the competencies to manage change in our organization, and hence be with our people? Okay, this course is definitely going to help all of us. And as you are aware, the Pune people, that National HRD Network has always focused on skill development, may it be analytics, may it be design thinking, may it be coaching, and now we've come up with this, and we are so fortunate to have partnered with ASM's executive education branch, and fortunate to have these two gentlemen from overseas who have agreed to share their knowledge and experience with us. The course content, I think if you have not received the details, we will share it with you now that we have your contact details. The link will be shared with all of you. And after that, if you still have any queries, you feel free to get in touch with us. We will try and resolve all of that. And if we are unable to do so, we have the permission to send your queries, to connect you with our esteemed facilitators. Yeah. So this is, in short, this is what it is about the course. Ladies and gentlemen, I would also want to thank all of you for having joined us on this lovely Saturday evening. It's been wonderful to have you amongst us, and we will continue to interact. My heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Roland Livingston, Mr. Quang Lee, for being present. And you may know that For us, this is evening time, but for them, it is very, very early morning. So thank you so much for for taking out time, waking up and being so fresh and fresh as morning dew. My gratitude to Kulkarni Saab for being the guiding source. Jitendra, of course, you've been a wonderful moderator. The kind of questions you've been able to manage and moderating the entire show. We have in the background we have Mr. Marshall also. Thank you so much. And we had one very key team member who unfortunately is not with us right now, Mr. Ashish Pandita, who's part of the executive education. He had to, take a break for some medical emergency in his home. But it's what so, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here, and I cannot thank enough, but this is what it is. We will continue to interact and we will be in touch. And as Jitendra ji mentioned that the course, we will see you on the 13th of October. And in between, you have any queries, do feel free to connect with us. So thank you so much. Have a good evening. Have a good weekend. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Roland. Thank you, Quang. Thank you, Amanji.
Yes.
Thank you.
तो कुलकर्णी आप कुछ बोलना चाहेंगे?
Then it's all right, Praful. You are covered extremely well, and then we look forward to their participation and the workshop to happen as intense and much more than what it is now. Really getting into the nitty-gritties.